Welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. Hey everyone, I'm Mark Moyer, author of Win Again, speaker, career coach, and business advisor. And I help athletes, executives, and entrepreneurs reach their fullest potential. What you're going to be hearing in every single episode are conversations with athletes and other sports-related influencers. And we'll be offering you the insight that you need to succeed in life, including advice that will let you jump past your competition, whether it be for a great new job or taking your business to a much, much higher level. Make sure to connect with me on social media at Mark Moyer Coach and go to my website, markmoyer.com, to get access to the tips and strategies that my coaching clients get directly. If you're looking for ways to make your mark, send me an email to mark@markmoyer.com and I'll get you going right away. Thanks for joining me today. It's going to be an awesome episode. Now, are you ready to make your mark? Let's do this. Welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. My name is Mark Moyer and I'm broadcasting to you live from New York City. And I just finished a live interview with Major General Jeffrey Milhorn. And here's a gentleman who has served our country for 29 years. That's right, 29 years. And he's currently the commanding general of the Army Corps of Engineers. And it's really an incredible position he's got, but he's really served in such a variety of capacities. What an incredible gentleman, and I'm super thrilled to have had him on board. You'll hear all kinds of things, including the importance of serving our country, all the way through to the impact of nature on our environment, and a wide variety of topics, including him being a surfer dude. But that's right, a surfer dude. But before you jump into the episode, make sure you go ahead and click on subscribe button wherever you see it on your computer, whether it's on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or you're watching it on YouTube. Jump in there. Also go to my website anytime, markmoyer.com, for great access to all the previous podcast episodes I've had. Amazing guests. They're really both military and athlete, and also content that will really help elevate your career or your business. Lots of great stuff there. Send me an email anytime to mark@markmoyer.com. I'd love to hear from you. We can talk about a wide variety of things, but it's all meant to get you ahead. That's what I do. Anyway, before much more, I want you to listen to this episode. You're going to love it. The Major General's a fantastic guy, and he's got so many great things to say, such a great message. Happy listening. Welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. My name is Mark Moyer, and I'm super duper excited to have Major General Jeffrey Milhorn with me today. It's really an honor to have somebody like you with me. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Mark.
Well, we have a lot to cover. We're going to get through a lot of different things, but really what I wanted to start with, and I always like to start with, is just hearing how you became you. And what I mean by that is, I know you grew up in Florida, but what was it was there one moment that you woke up and said, I'm going in. I'm joining the military. How did that all happen?
Well, I guess, I certainly give a lot of props to my father, who also served. And so he was first generation Milhorn, I guess, to serve. And so having moved around as a young man, became somewhat familiar a little bit with the lifestyle. And then certainly, I looked to, okay, well, how can I maybe take that experience and apply it towards maybe a scholarship program that would fund my education, and then go on from there and continue to serve. And whether it be 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, or 29, where I'm at today, certainly my parents would have said, well, we didn't expect you to stay as long as you did. But I think it began with my father and my exposure, which, sadly is about where we stand today, where we describe it as a legacy for us, where it's more and more families that have served that continue to serve. And I would say that because even my own son, 26 years old, is in Kirkuk, Iraq today. Okay. So now he's number 3 in the Milhorn lineup to have done so. But it was, I think, just initial curiosity as well, in terms of, hey, what did my dad do? And, is this something that I would continue to want to do? And really kind of was drawn to it after you get less focused on yourself, and you start looking about, okay, how do I contribute to something much bigger than myself? So that's really how it started.
That's great. Now, was he also Army? Or?
My father was. He served for 22 years, a Vietnam veteran, 61 to 83. And so upon retiring, he moved to Florida and said, hey, we're moving. And I was just about to graduate from high school in Kansas, is where I grew up in the Midwest. And I said, well, wait a minute. Florida, Kansas. That was a pretty easy toss-up. So I went to Florida sight unseen and attended the University of Florida. Yes.
Sight unseen, wow. Now, my fear of Florida is always just, it seems like you see a lot of pictures, how beautiful it is, but then it's always just hot, isn't it?
Oh, it's they don't call the swamp in Gainesville for nothing. It's pretty humid there, and but great football team though. I gotta say, go Gators to all my fans out there.
Of course, slip that in. Now, while you were there, was there any specific? What kind of training were you getting while you were in school, in university? And so?
Well, I was studying to be an engineer, and in fact, I had received an ROTC scholarship based on that curriculum, and so while there, I also signed up with the Florida National Guard, so I had another opportunity to see another component of our services, so I enrolled in what was known as a simultaneous membership program with the 3rd Battalion, 20th Special Forces Group in Florida at the time, and so did that for about 2 years while I was still in school, kind of supplementing gas and pizza money on the side.
Well, that's cool. Now, upon graduation, what was that? So how do they start things off? What's the next step?
No, sure. So upon graduating, you're commissioned. You raise your right hand and pledge the oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and then you're off and running. And for me, because I was an engineer, I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where we went to our officer basic course. So I was a direct commission, and there are multiple ways of entering the military, whether you're enlisting, going through officer candidate school, or a direct commission either through ROTC or West Point or the other academies based on the services that you join. And then from there, you start down this path of assigned leadership positions at a very young age. So as a young lieutenant with 22, 23 years of age, you're now responsible for 30 other soldiers in this case and their families, and so you kind of grow up pretty quickly because now you realize it isn't about you, it's about the team and how you build that team and move down towards whatever objectives are set before you or missions set before you. So.
Now, what do you think were a couple of the challenges when you're that age, 22, 23, and you're overseeing these men and women, you're saying,
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I get the opportunity to see that through the eyes of my son even today when I get these random phone calls, and he'll say, wow, we got a real circus going on in some cases. And I'm going to say, I said, all right, you're talking to your dad, not a general officer right now, and don't use any names.
Yeah, right.
So,
right.
But I think it is really, you're still trying to define who you are as an individual and understand your purpose and contribution to any organization that you're a part of. And now you're not only responsible for yourself, but everybody else around you. And I would also say you're kind of going through that transition from a civilian into the military and learning more about what would be expected of you. Not everybody comes with the same values, and you're trying to inculcate, if you will, those values that make you a proud member of the service, no matter what, whether it's soldier, sailor, airman, Marines, and coasties as well. So.
Right. Now, did you? So, in terms of the challenges themselves, was it something where when you're overseeing all these men and women, is it something where you're commanding them all day, all night, everything, or is it something where they've got their own thing, you're doing your own thing, you're in an office somewhere? What's it? Talk to me about that.
Well,
structure
I guess
there.
It depends on where you are, and if I were to look at it through the eyes of young service members today that are still deployed in harm's way, certainly when I came in, that was not necessarily the case. Whereas today, you're deploying your whether it's service in peace or in combat situations, you're still responsible 24/7. And though you may have what we would refer to as non-duty hours, you're still on 24/7, because if you get that phone call in the middle of the night, there's an expectation that you're going to respond on behalf of the organization that you're a part of, especially if it involves family members of those service members that are part of your unit. And so that's kind of what builds that cohesive, organizational desire, I guess, that to continue to work with those folks left and right of you.
Now, I'm assuming that your superiors are recognizing that there are certain people like yourself that have become pretty strong leaders, and there are others that maybe are not as well suited to that. Is that sort of how you beat out others to progress along the way?
Well, there are. I mean, we have selection processes for promotions, for key and developmental assignments, commands as you move through the ranks over time, and absolutely. I mean, we have what would be referred to as force distribution in terms of how you evaluate folks. So you're forced to make those hard calls, and you're constantly assessing people in terms of their ability to accomplish what they've been tasked to do, and still take care of the people that they're responsible for in a meaningful way. Yes, there's always a formal procedure for selecting you and moving you along, whether it be 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, or 20, 35 years. I mean, it's always there.
So throughout your career, I mean, you've been in, as you said, 29 years. At what point do you start being in a position that you can almost suggest where you wouldn't mind going next versus kind of being volunteered or voluntold?
Well, I think that's I mean, one of the neat things about our military service is that you still do have an opportunity to express your desire in terms of what you want to do, and it starts from the very beginning, from a young service member walking into a recruiting office and, what do you want to do? I mean, we've got over 150 different military occupational specialties, and of which at some point in time will translate to a civilian workforce. And so you have a vote from the very beginning before you even walk in. It probably drew you to that. Well, similarly, as you continue to move up through the ranks and depending on where you are, whether it's expressing a location desire or certainly the type of organization that you want to join, there may be tests along the way, physical aptitude and things along those lines that will determine whether or not you even qualify for certain organizations, or maybe even professional credentialing that you may require to continue to move up through those different types. But you can express your interest. Now, ultimately, though, a decision will be made, and then once the decision is made, you own the decision as much as the one that who made that decision on your behalf, and now you go forward and execute based on the direction given.
Now, are there typically time frames that are associated with each command, or not necessarily?
There are. I mean, usually most commands that we have today are limited, even as a young officer, for a platoon commander or platoon leader position, minimally at least 12 months. Oftentimes we'll have others serve in that capacity for 18 to 24 months, maybe varying different types of units. And as you continue to go up through the ranks, usually between 2 and 3 years is what you command an organization for. I've commanded at the division level, usually at that was at a 2-year mark. I'm currently approaching a year in the command that I'm in today, and will likely serve in this capacity for at least another year.
Okay, so in terms of your steps along the way, I did notice a few interesting pit stops. And I know that when we met and you spoke at the Union League Club fairly recently, you mentioned that your wife was pretty happy about one specific pit stop in, I believe it was Hawaii. That's not a bad place to be. I can just see that now. Who wants to serve in Hawaii? And not like the Antarctica or whatever some of the other spots are. But what did you get to do out there?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I mean, that was actually, I was approaching that fork in the road in terms of, okay, do we continue to serve in the capacity that we are and see what the future brings, or is it time to transition? Because at that time, my obligation for my education was coming due. And but my wife and I had 2 young kids at the time, and we decided that, all right, let's see what the Army offers, and certainly make our personal preferences made known, but we knew that was lower priority. Sure enough, Hawaii popped up for the first of 4 times back, so I actually got about 10 years back in the Pacific, and so we thoroughly enjoyed it there, whether it was at a captain level where I commanded a company, or going back as a brigade commander, now a full colonel with an organization just shy of 2,000 soldiers, and then a division within the Corps, and then serving in other capacities in senior staff positions. So phenomenal opportunity that may have started with a responsibility that was focused on Hawaii and Hawaii-based, that grew into an area that encompassed really largely the Pacific, from India to the west coast of California, Australia to the North Pole. So Bollywood to Hollywood, polar bears to penguins, that's about 50% of the global surface. supporting
I feel like
others.
you've said that before. That was like that was pretty. That was clever how you did that. Although I guess some of the polar bears are starting to come a little farther south, aren't
sadly,
they?
yeah, sadly.
Well, we'll talk about that in a minute, I guess. I got to jump in real quickly with something I read the other day, and it really caught me off guard. And it was in the Times, and I'm assuming it must be true. Therefore, that don't note the sarcasm, but I'm sure it's interesting to note that they say that when you fly across the country, New York to LA, the seat that you're in, like if you fly yourself, the amount of whatever it is that your chunk of what's burned and the fossil fuels and so forth is equivalent of melting, they said, 9 square feet of Arctic ice. Or like the space of they were saying like a flatbed truck or something. I mean, like a pickup truck or something. And so, of course, the writer it was in the travel section, and he was saying, well, for all those people that are trying to be environmentalists, and they say, save this and save that. Well, if they're traveling to different places to talk about this, they're basically subterfuging their own argument, right?
Sure.
So I was thinking, oh man, I'm trying to think about how much of a chunk of the Arctic I've melted myself. Just whatever.
No, I
mean,
know.
I left my SUV parked outside idling. Is that a good plan or not? No, I didn't do that. But that's an interesting little stat.
No, and being an environmentalist at heart, I mean, I spend a lot of time on the water, and you mentioned Hawaii. I mean, I'm an amateur surfer at best, but I spend a lot of time, and when I do, whether it be observing other organizations that are trying to keep the oceans clean or the environment clean, reducing fossil fuel consumption. I think we all have a personal responsibility for that. And it's, now I'm not going to ask you to pick up a piece of trash walking through the streets of New York here, because you would never get to the end of the, a walkway because of that. But I mean, we have an obligation personally to do things like that. Take it seriously. And we can talk more about that with regards to even our approach from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as we look at climate change, sea level rise, and those things that we face and that are real and occurring, and we have to be postured to respond to it. And there are things that we're doing today to address those concerns.
Well, and perfect little segue. Magic how that happens. Well, there's 2 separate things I want to talk about. I've been fascinated, and you said you're aware of it, but the efforts to clean up the oceans, like the big giant, what do they call it, the size of the state of Texas or something floating around out there in the Pacific, right? But what do you think? What's your opinion on the capability of efforts like that? I mean, are they putting a dent in things? Is it going to be effective? Not necessarily.
I think every institution, whether it's government, public, private, nonprofit, whatever, has a responsibility to police up. And oftentimes, illegal activities, unregulated activities by other organizations and nations are not as willing to reduce consumption that lead to a lot of the problems that we have today. And until we globally agree through pressure, whether it be sanctions or maybe the United Nations and others, which they all recognize this as a problem. But I mean, everybody's going to give way together. And if the majority do and others don't, well, I mean, you're going to still have problems. And so it is a challenge. But we all have, a personal obligation, personal and professional obligation to do our part. And I don't hesitate pointing it out when I'm out and about, whenever we're there, to other nations of which we travel to routinely.
Well, that's great. I've noticed that every day I seem to see a new, I don't know if it's an invention or way that these, in fact, a lot of the wealthier people are trying to jump in and really create these ways to collect the garbage that's out there with these big giant, arms and buoys and that sort of thing, right? So that's fantastic. I hope that sort of helps. But now shifting gears to the climate change side, and obviously, and we don't need to get too into this, but there's all kinds of discussions, pro and con,
Sure.
this and that, right? But as overseeing the Army Corps of Engineers, and it's funny, when I was a lot younger, we'll say, in college, I went down on a trip down to New Orleans, where the Army Corps is developing, it's all flood control techniques there, right? And they built all these giant berms and so forth. And I think most people don't understand that New Orleans is below sea level, which is crazy to think, right? Well, I mean, we saw what happened. I mean, this was before, Katrina and so forth. Katrina, right? Or was it?
It was Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah. But what do you think? I mean, I don't know what the numbers are in terms of what people are expecting sea levels to rise and not rise and so forth over the next X amount of time. But, how dramatic, in your opinion, is it, or can it be, and how can it be?
Yeah. And I won't sport any facts and figures to you today either for fear of having to go back and background check. But the reality is that you are seeing the rise in the sea, right? You are seeing depletion of our marshlands and some of those natural structures that actually have served as barriers. I'll go from my own personal experience, having served in Hawaii, but working in Alaska, where I would go in the middle of the winter, January, February, just south of Nome, Alaska, and go out and look at the barrier ice that would typically, as the ices form across the ocean there, they will push up and create a barrier wall that actually protects the land from erosion and things along those lines. In the last few years, that barrier wall has decreased dramatically, and such that the erosive effects of the ocean and the just the aggressive nature of the waters there are starting to erode away the banks, where you have to look at civilian location or tribal villages and others that have seen this deteriorate over time, and that's a real concern, because now you have to maybe look at relocating inland away from these areas so that you don't put people at risk. So it is occurring, and we are starting to look at engineering with nature opportunities, even here in the New England, New York City area. I mean, you don't have to look very far. I mean, this October-November timeframe, we're approaching 7 years anniversary since the Hurricane Sandy swept through here, and we are to this day still applying our dredging practices to improve and protect the coastlines from Montauk Point down to Cape May in New Jersey, to protect the property and to protect the lives, most importantly, of those people that are impacted by it. Engineering with nature, we look at reconstructing marshes, reutilizing the dredge material if it's clean sand to build those marshes back up and serve it as barriers that they once were to protect property. But we now have to look at elevating homes and changing our design criteria and specifications of construction, of which all have been taken into consideration, because it is real. And just look at the last couple of years. I mean, we've had frequent storms, hurricane, Harvey, Irma, Maria 2 years ago. Last year it was Michael and Florence. We continue to receive, Congress recognizes that, and they provide supplemental funding to deal with the disasters that require the services that the U.S. Army Corps can provide, oftentimes after fact, longer-term reconstruction. But during the storms and during the disasters, our support of the Federal Emergency Management Agency as well.
What's interesting about Sandy, that you mentioned that earlier, I was here, and I'll never forget being in my apartment and watching TV, and we were looking out the window and we were saying, well, this is not really much of a hurricane. We don't see any cows flying by, or there's nothing blowing around that significantly. And then all of a sudden, poof, I could see out our window the transformer blow up at Con Ed down there, and then everything went dark.
Right.
And then people were like, "What the heck?" Right? And then we started on our cell phones seeing, some people said, "Oh, it should be back by morning, should be back by this."
Yeah, right.
We ended up going across town because there were just certain pockets that still had power. And we managed to get a room at the La Quinta, we had the last room, and only because, and we had reserved a room, but their reservation system was out. So they said, well, too bad kind of thing. But the two ladies in front of us, they insisted on having a view or something. And the guy says, we don't have one, or whatever. And they were like, fine, they left. And we're like, thank God. And we took that last room, and it didn't have a view. And it was not the greatest, but they had electricity. So anyway, and what I was doing every day was literally running with the ice machine. I'd fill up bags of ice and run them back to my apartment up to the 18th floor and put them in the fridge and try to keep everything going. But what most people don't realize or remember about Sandy, at least that they're not from here, is the damage was not from the wind; it was from the surge,
The
storm
surge of waters that came into the subway systems and the corrosive effects to all the subways.
Not just that,
So-
but even Staten Island
Right.
got crushed, and,
Oh,
and
yeah.
Brooklyn, and
Yeah.
and that's where most of the
Yeah.
deaths happened.
Yeah,
because these
over
people
I
didn't
think
leave.
24 lives lost in South Shore Staten Island alone, and so as we've again working with not only the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers but certainly state and city officials, the Department of Interior, to bring everybody together as we start to build that back better to protect against that from occurring, and that is always going to be a challenge, and the intensity and the frequency of storms going back to climate change have been increasing. So you look back at that over the history of our nation and really the globe, and you start looking at what is actually occurring. So is it cyclical? I mean, I guess, I go back to, the scientist. Believe me, I'm not the expert on it, but I know what we need to do to continue to prepare ourselves and protect lives and property as best we can, and we're doing those things. But it's still, we're just scratching the surface, right?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with sort of trying to educate everyone out there, and I think that there's some people that don't necessarily want to be educated. There's others that do, and there's some that are a little on the one side, and there are others that are way on the other side, and so it's hard to really match everybody up. But I think that just
until they're affected by it, right?
Well, right.
And oftentimes what I see is people that don't come from here that are actually advocating against, which I'm like, all right, are you from here? Is that your property? Are those your lives that you're watching or protecting? And oftentimes they're not. And that's where, I get a little frustrated, and I'll get heated too, because I'm doing what we can to prepare and best protect against that from occurring again.
The state you need to start with, I think, is California. They got all the issues out there. It's it's funny. All my relatives are out there. You got to come move here. I'm like, well, let's see. You got fires, you got drought, you got this, you got that, you got whatever, earthquakes. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know. Well, I'll visit here and there.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge.
That and everything else going on over there. Okay, so out of all these places you've been stationed all over, everywhere, right?
A lot of the world. Yeah.
Do you have other than Hawaii, because you can't use that, but is there a second favorite?
Wow. It's hard for me because I think, and I don't want to be coy about it, but it's really about meeting people wherever you go. And that's what I think I enjoy most about what I'm doing, is because no matter what line of work I'm in, whether it's the janitor of the building, Enrique in my own building that I talk to every once in a while, or some head of state in another nation whenever we're going in to visit and talk about things that we can do to improve lives. It's a hard question. It really is. Living in the Pacific for, as I said, nearly a third of my career, there's a fondness there with Asia. But Europe's been fun too. I have enjoyed that. Lived there for about 3 years in the service, 3 years as a dependent with my father serving. So I am fond of that and the opportunity to go out and cross international boundaries today without having to, get my passport checked multiple times. But so.
As it should. No, I'm kidding. And that was very coy. Thank you. And evasive, but that's all right. You're allowed a few of those. Anyway, so I want to talk real quickly about something that's pretty important to me. I know it is to you too. And that's, I love the other work that you're doing with the Corps of Engineers. I think it's fabulous. Mm-hmm. And you'd mentioned when I first heard you speak about a particular project, bringing in, what was it, 8, I don't know, how sand was it that you brought into?
3 million cubic yards of sand, I think, or thereabouts on, where was this on you're talking about Long Island?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
That's that's just a small little project, right?
Just a small one, but that's part of, again, the response to Hurricane Sandy, right? So
that's amazing. But shifting gears, I'm a big fan of also helping veterans as they transition. And, you're obviously in the middle of your, well, I don't want to say the middle of your career unless you're going to be doing 58 years, but I guess not. Are you doing 50
There's
years?
a lot less in the windshield than there is in the rearview mirror. Let's just put it that way.
Well stated. But with that said, what are some of the things that I'd love to hear your perspective on what you think service members are facing when they leave their service?
Okay.
And what do you think could be really helpful?
Well, and I've got to look at it through the lens of even myself,
Yeah,
right? As I
right.
start to look at, what's the future hold for somebody that's been in the same line of business for 3 decades, which is rare today. But a veteran could serve 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and the reasons why they joined are all different, and the reasons why they leave are all different. But what it does come down to, I think, for any of them is, all right, how do I define who I am, what my purpose in life is, what structure or plan do I have to influence that transition, and to achieve what it is that's most important to me. I think in a previous discussion, you and I talked about it. Oftentimes when people join the military, it's never about me or I, and it often is, again, how do you service? The word service itself is indicative of joining something much broader than oneself, right? You're serving with and for others. But now, what happens when you transition to, all right, now what is it that's important to me? What values do I have carrying out of this organization that I've been a part of for however many years? And then what's my plan for the transition? And so the Army's had to look at that too, because we have done fairly decent in bringing folks in, and we realized that we weren't nearly as good as transitioning people out. And we recognize that we're not the only ones that can help with that. But we are trying to make changes, and we have made some significant changes in terms of, all right, no kidding, we've got to protect the amount of time to allow the individual to prepare for that transition, and then provide them some tools and resources that will enable that transition to occur much more successfully. But oftentimes that population, often coined as an at-risk population, 18 to 24 years old, they may not have served very long, but they may have been subjected to, even over that short period of time, some tremendous activity in their life, some of which is positive, a lot of which can be negative. And then how do you protect them as they transition from your organization into the world again? And again, we're working on it. We've got some work still left to be done there, but there are many organizations, to include maybe one that you may mention that you're a part of, which we're grateful to, for assisting us with that effort. And not only the members themselves, but also spouses of members who have sacrificed often more than the service members themselves.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And, it's interesting that, you talk about the 18 to 24, but also I think not as many people look at those that have spent, like yourself, a career in, and, whether it's even 8, 10, 12, 15 years, because what's interesting is a lot of times they're accustomed to being a bigger the big fish, right? And then suddenly they're kicked out a little bit, and they're out there and saying, wait a second, but I was at this level,
right?
And now you want me to do what? That sort of thing. And I think what's important, especially with veterans, is to really give them, I think, the confidence, or remind them that they actually bring so much more to the table than they realize they have.
Right.
And, one of the things that I notice, and it's very similar with athletes as it is with veterans, that oftentimes they don't understand a lot of the things that translate so well. When you talk about someone in a civilian capacity, they don't necessarily know the structure, the work ethic, the attention to detail.
Yeah. They don't translate, right? So, the challenge that we have, and if you were to tell me today, sit down and write a resume out, well, what would it look like? It'd probably look like a chronological order of everything I've done over the last few years. But if somebody were to look at that through private industry eyes, they'd say, well, what does that mean, right? And you're absolutely right. It's the intangibles of what a veteran can bring to bear. Leadership at a very young age, bias towards action, a set of values that they can bring to bear in building a team, and that will give their all, especially if they're striving to achieve the goals and objectives set before them by a company or something along those lines. But that doesn't often translate. And so how do we work and spend more time? And oftentimes, even, I think you and I spoke about resumes. It's not necessarily a thing of the past, but today it's more about networking and using the media that we have available to us, social media included, a variety of different programs out there that are easily available on the web to provide that access that otherwise would not be given by just passing out a resume at a job search or an industry day.
Yeah, it's funny that one thing I like to tell people is that if you put a civilian in a room full of veterans, they feel really intimidated and uncomfortable. You put a veteran in a room full of civilian executives and so on, they sometimes feel pretty intimidated and uncomfortable. And I think if you show veterans, you show civilians that we're all sort of same X% water, whatever the hell it is, right? We're all the same kind of thing. And it's just a question of just changing the perception to the point where they can feel that comfortable and get that confidence back, the mojo back that they felt in the service, bring it into the corporate environment, or if they're running a business into that environment, then it's actually not as hard or as challenging as they think it might be. And, that's the message I'm trying to get across. Now, shifting gears one more quick time. I know something that you're passionate about, and we'll talk about this now, is really the whole notion of service and the whole notion of really, right, well, give me this. I know you want, I'll let you talk about the stats and so forth on right now today, how many people are serving and where are they coming from?
Well, I mean, see, that's the question. I think, are we talking about the 1% Club? Yeah. So, in terms of whether it be all components of service, all services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, I have to always throw a plug in for our Coast Guardsmen that work for the Department of Homeland Security, but certainly from a Department of Defense perspective. It is largely representative of 1% of the population that continue to serve. And as I've mentioned in other discussions, that it often is a legacy of families that continue to serve in some capacity. And so the challenge, again, through opportunities to reach out, as you said, interact amongst these various groups, to educate them on what we do, to eliminate that fear. I always find it enjoyable going to an enlistment or recruitment dinner and getting to talk to family members and say, you know what, I never say I'm in command of or I'm in charge of. It's like, no, I serve with and for, to include your sons and daughters. And oh, by the way, my son's still serving now too. And so yours are just as important to me as mine. How do you educate others in terms of what we do? And I take the opportunity, living here or just south of here in Brooklyn, to come into the city and talk to private organizations, oftentimes banks and others, businesses, because a lot of what we do is very similar and it does translate. It's always about taking care of people. It's always about program execution or delivery, mission accomplishment in military terms, setting goals and objectives. It's about building teams and sometimes team of teams, depending on how large your organizations are, and then being able to communicate and sharing that and saying it translates across any organization that you're a part of. Now, how do you bring that to bear, and how do you educate people on it? And we're going through recruiting efforts using different techniques. We're learning through gaming, through sportsmanship and sporting activities, to draw people in that, of interest, or technical capabilities across all the services. There's an adventurism element to it, but you would think that would be pretty big, but actually, depending on where you are in the nation, there's a different draw depending on where you're at. And you'd find here to be more of a technical draw. You may go out on the Long Island towards Montauk and it gets more adventurous, right? But I'm not sure why.
Well, now, and what's interesting, I think the average person, I don't know if there's such a thing as average person, but the person out there may think that, gee, well, if I serve, I'm going to be in combat or in harm's way and that sort of thing, and you certainly want people that are understanding of that and comfortable with that, but there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that people don't realize that it's not everybody is out there, that there's a whole lot going on behind the scenes that is absolutely mission critical, right? And maybe that's part of the messaging that may be helpful to get across, is that you're just as inclined to be doing a lot of this and doing analytical stuff, or even you're the mechanic, or you're something else that's not necessarily out there.
Well, absolutely. And those are skills that translate easier, when you make that transition out of uniform, however short-lived that may be, or as long, it could be decades. But there is always the conflict aspect of it, and that's always of concern to any parent, grandparent, sibling, to whomever you talk to. But it is a small part of what is required, and but there are tremendous advantages, benefits that come with service as well. We talk about those. Again, everybody's got a different bent in terms of why they want to join.
Right.
Is it education? Is it patriotism? Is it truly just wanting to discover whom they are as part of something bigger than oneself? And then some people find that, wow, this has provided structure to my life that I didn't have before, and it allows me to define goals and objectives personally and professionally that I want to contribute to, of which, again, can translate to something later on down the road when you transition out.
Right. That's perfect. And, the bottom line is that I think that, there's certain people that feel a little concerned about serving, but then there's others that sort of, when I was that age, when I was 18, I'm a little bit older than you, but nothing was really happening globally, or we weren't in, I think it was Grenada, or maybe, there wasn't much going on.
Sure.
There wasn't that rah, let's go kick some ass somewhere kind of thing. It was pretty quiet out there.
Right.
So there wasn't as much of the fervor to join necessarily. Now it's a different story, I think. And, what I like about your messaging, I heard it the other day and I'm hearing it now too, is just that the whole idea of if we get more men and women in, it just makes things so much easier, right? And it's, the whole concept of wanting to join versus feeling compelled to or needing to,
right?
But just the whole wanting to.
Right. We're not a country conscripting, right? There's no mandatory service. There are countries out there that do. And I think from, those that have served in that capacity, and again, I'm not implying that that's the way, but what they do feel then is they've contributed to their nation going forward, and protecting the rights that they were born with. We've got a lot of folks that come here from outside of our country. That's how we're a nation of immigrants. And given that alone, you see the opportunity to give back, to thank, this nation for what you've done, for the rights that you have. How can I contribute? And I'm not asking it to be, again, not everybody's going to do it for patriotic reasons. Everybody's got a reason for wanting to join. And maybe it's changing their way of life. Maybe it's seeking opportunity that they didn't once have, education included. And then really looking at the benefits that may translate as they transition on through the Veterans Administration and veteran service organizations that recognize that, you've done what, again, 99% of the rest of the population haven't done. Thanks for stepping up and doing for your country that others have sometimes, not everybody, taken for granted.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. All right, well, look, we're going to shift gears now again.
Okay.
This is my little Hit Your Mark segment. It's going to be pretty easy, I think. Number one, I know you've done a lot of surfing, whether you're amateur or not. It's another story, but you are a surfer dude, whether you like to admit it or not.
Yeah.
Give me your favorite place to surf.
Well, right now I'd have to say that's in Hawaii. On the North Shore of Hawaii, and I'm not talking on Bonsai Pipeline where you're going to get crushed into the reef upon, but Puena Point, for those that may hear of, or Ali'i, which is just outside of the town, right on the north side of Haleiwa, is a favorite place, and it always will be. One, because I spent that time with my son as well, who's also a surfer, and could get up early in the morning, hit it, and then still be in to work on or even on the weekends at home when Debbie expected me to be there in a timely manner.
That's funny.
So, but now it's Rockaway Beach because it's it's a 25-minute ride, and I can go out there and the parking's free. So
parking's free. But and it's funny. Just to bring up a point, that the other day I was talking to a friend of mine who was fairly new to New York, and he said that he didn't the outside world doesn't realize that there's surfing nearby here. He said that he was on the subway and there was a guy on the subway with a surfboard, and he's like, "What the hell? What are you doing with it?" And he goes, "Dude, I'm going to Rockaway Beach." That's what he said. So, and I don't know how many people can envision. Like me, I was going to say I'm scared of major generals and stuff, but I'm intimidated. But then I'm thinking, well, this guy's a surfer, dude. He kept and is that like, do people know you as the guy with the board right here wearing the Hawaii?
Yeah, no,
I don't think so, right?
So mean, if you were in Hawaii, they would see my my car parked with a surfboard on it probably. And I've done that once or twice here just to kind of, shake things up a little bit to see it. But But I think what it does is, I mean, it's just something, again, that everybody's got to have a hobby or some place where they can go and calm their mind, right? Call it mindfulness, call it meditation, call it a religion if you need to. But I mean, somebody that you got to have something internally for yourself. And my wife, it's so funny when Debbie, she'll see a look across my face or just maybe tired eyes or something. And she goes, "Hey, I recognize, you know what? You need to get in the water and soothe and just calm and take some time for yourself because the travel schedule can be pretty rigorous. And so that's what I also offer to everybody else. When they ask, "Hey, how do you maintain some balance in your life? How do you maintain your physical fitness when you're moving around?" I'm like, you've got to find something. And it could be reading. It could be going to church. It could be going to the water or in whatever capacity. Maybe your head underneath an engine or playing softball downtown in New York City on a long day.
Dear God. Dear God. Well, that's all amazing. So one last question, then we'll tie things together here. If you had a chance to be in any band, like if someone said to you, "Hey, listen, Mick Jagger needs an extra guy," or whatever, what band would it be?
Wow.
Jump in and strum a guitar or whatever it might be.
Jimmy Buffett?
Yeah, really?
There you go.
You seem like a Buffett guy, totally.
Or Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson. I've gone to a couple of his concerts in Hawaii, and he's a former surfer that got beat up pretty good in the waves and decided to transition to something else. So maybe just watching how that guy went from one line of work to another, may be applicable even to this discussion today.
You're not going to believe this, by the way. My last 2 podcasts ago, I had a head coach for Colgate University football team on, and he's a huge Buffett guy. Like, that's all he talked about was Jimmy Buffett. I'm like, wow, he's Buffett in the air. Anyway, well, listen, I really appreciate your time today. I truly do. I'm thrilled with both, your service and all that you're doing, not just currently and what you've done in the past, but really your vision of what's important going forward. And I know that a lot of what you're trying to do is get that message out, and that's hopefully this will help a little bit. And we'll put it out there as much as we can, certainly. And it's fantastic what you do. I think most people don't completely understand what goes on behind the scenes. So I really appreciate that and appreciate your time.
Yeah,
Thank you so
Mark.
much.
Thanks again for the opportunity. And as we've talked before about just the opportunity to open up to a larger audience, and take some of that. I don't know if it's fear or just anxiety about what the United States military does, and what others can do. But this is a great opportunity. And I also say thank you to you as well for your establishment of a nonprofit on behalf of veterans and spouses, military spouses, who have given a lot. And it's through institutions such as your own and numerous others. I think that's honestly part of the challenge of somebody transitioning is there's hundreds of organizations that say, "Hey, we're out here to help," but making that connection, how do you do that? And I just, again, personally say, we, the military, certainly have an obligation in that transition, but it's in partnership with organizations such as your own that we're very grateful for. So thank you again for everything.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Pleasure to meet you.
Thanks so much for joining us today on this episode of Make Your Mark podcast. The goal of the podcast is to help you find ways to make your mark, to succeed in life, and to jump past your competition. Be sure to leave me a review on iTunes and Stitcher, and subscribe to be the first to hear new episodes. If you're looking for ways to make your mark, send me an email, mark@markmoyer.com, and I'll get back to you right away. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.